Today we're joined by Neil Tantingco, founder of Connected Home Living, who shares how he went from tech to transforming senior care. We talk about blending human touch with technology, remote monitoring, AI fall detection, and the future of age tech in healthcare. Let's get to it.
All right, everybody, welcome to the show. This is Design to Thrive, and my name is Ngoc. We have Neil on the show, and he's from Connected Home Living. Welcome, Neil.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you taking the time.
Cool. So we'll start off with the story. What's your story? How did you land at Connected Home Living?
Okay, so I'm Neil Tantingco, the founder and CEO of Connected Home Living. I actually have two hats, and my two hats began here in Silicon Valley. I live here in California, in San Jose. Just like many folks here in San Jose, we all work for high-tech companies, and that's where my journey began. I worked for companies like Netscape, I worked for Yahoo, worked for VMware, did that for a couple of almost a dozen and a half, 1.5 decades, I mean, and I just grew tired with that career path. You know, who wants to do data center and efficiency, right? So it wasn't my calling. So in 2000, I decided to acquire an assisted living building. It's the industry that I've always wanted to jump into. So I just went in headfirst, cashed out all my high tech stocks, and I bought a building full of old people. So in 2000, we acquired this 50-bed community in Central California. Half of the building, we care for people who have Alzheimer's, and the other half, they just need basic assisted living care. And that's how I immersed myself in senior care. And then what happened next is that I missed technology so much that I started infusing technology to provide not just better patient care or resident care, but also I wanted to figure out how to retain my residents longer, because typically by the time to move into these type of communities, they're usually not there because they're volunteering to move in. They're moving in because something catastrophic has occurred. Maybe they broke a hip, they had a triple bypass, another stroke or heart attack. They're in a state where they can't really be on their own anymore, and they need more hands-on care. And it gets to a point where it's more cost effective to move to an assisted living community as opposed to continue to live at home. And so when I started blending technology as part of my care, I wanted to use the technology to identify issues related to their health, because typically seniors who move into these type of buildings, they have two chronic conditions, and there's no cure for those conditions, like congestive heart failure, pneumonia, diabetes. We just need to better manage them, but more importantly, how to identify those red flags early on so we can do something about it. So I started using technology, simple technology, like capturing their vitals, asking questions specific to their chronic ailment. But along the way, I started collecting all this data. I was like, wow, okay, I don't know what 120 over 80 means, because I'm not non-clinical. I come from a business background. And my caregivers were non-clinical as well. They're fantastic caregivers, but they're not licensed nurses or doctors, right? And so, but still, the data we collected allowed us to share it with the home health nurses who would come into our building, or every time we'd go to the doctor's appointment, we'd share it with the doctor. It's like, hey, doc, this may not make sense to me, but maybe you can use this data. And sure enough, they would look at the information like, holy smokes, Neil. I saw Mrs. Smith 6 months ago, and 2 minutes ago, I asked her how she's doing, and she said, I'm doing great. But boy, when he looked at the data, I was like, but according to the charts that you've been capturing or the values you're capturing, her glucose readings are like a Richter scale. And it looks like, her weight gain was getting a lot more rapid. And I'm glad that you noticing that the leg's getting more swollen. But anyway, the data that the doctor is now consuming is what he calls empirical data. This is true data. Now he has data between the last time he saw the patient to that day of the appointment. And so what was surprising about data sharing, it allowed us to collaborate more together. He would say, like, okay, now that I got this data, let me readjust their meds. But while I have you here, moving forward, I need you to do the following. Do this, elevate their legs, drink more water, do more exercises. Where before we were just kind of, being a non-clinical provider, we were just kind of doing what we thought would be good, right? But now we're getting the true orders from the physician. And so that's when I started thinking, wow, technology with senior care before was counterintuitive, but but it made more sense, right? It made a lot of sense. So that's the beginning of me adding in technology as part of my senior care, because we started seeing less move outs because less and less residents were going to the hospitals. And so we became full. And so we started developing a waiting list of wanting people wanting to move into my community. And being a business person that I am, well, let me extend my services to the home. So as they're waiting to move into my building, let me provide caregivers to care for them at home as they're waiting to move in, right? But that's when I really saw the strength of technology, because I thought when we would show up at their home, they would hire us 24/7. But in California or all across the United States, the cost for live-in care, believe it or not, it's about $1,100 per day if you're going to have somebody who is properly trained and licensed to care for an aging loved one. $1,100 per day. So you multiply that by 30 days, that's a lot of money. And so
Yeah.
majority of the budgets that we typically come across are $5,000, $6,000 per month, which is still a lot of money. But even with that, a large sum of budget per month, that's going to limit our care to, let's say, 8 hours per day or 4 hours a day. So it becomes a limited care visit. So when we're there physically, sure enough, the patient or the client's very compliant. They're doing all the things they should be doing. But the trouble is, once our caregiver leaves, right? Once that caregiver clocks out and leaves the driveway, that's when the trouble happens, right? That's where you see undetected falls. That's when you see
That's right.
residents who don't comply to their, let's say, their medication regimen, right? Or things that they should be doing, like drinking water more, or elevating their legs, or locking the front door, leaving the stove off, right? So I said to myself, well, let me blend technology to bridge that gap of care, right? So in between the caregiver visit and in between, let's say, a family checking in, I decided to blend technology with what I call remote care, or sometimes it's called virtual care. These are live people who respond to the technology that we placed in the home. So in the home, I started using remote patient monitoring, all right, and which we'll go over in a little bit more. I started using fall detection because I thought the current fall detection solutions today would do the job, but I learned the hard way that it didn't do the job at all. And so when I started utilizing this, that's when I had that aha moment and created connected home living. Because what I learned the hard way is that this solution isn't just unique to the problem that I was trying to solve at that time when I before I started connecting home living. I discovered this is a problem that's prevalent not just in the United States but all over the world, right? So in 2015, I established connected home living.
Okay, so when you first launched Connected Home Living, what was the biggest challenge in getting people to buy into the idea of tech-enhanced care?
Good question. So when I launched Connected Home Living, this is pre-COVID, right? So the whole idea of talking to somebody on a screen, the whole idea of sharing data remotely and having somebody else access that data, it was pretty foreign. It was really difficult to try to explain. So getting people to adopt to it took almost an act of God. But the only folks who pretty much adopted to it are people who had limited budget, or they were just prevalent going in and out of the hospital. So in the beginning, those are the type of clients that we were going after. But post COVID, boy, the business picked up. Reason being is because during COVID, people got accustomed to telehealth, right? They got accustomed to seeing their doctors remotely. They got accustomed to, sharing their data. They got accustomed to, building this up as part of their day-to-day life. And so that's why after COVID, the whole idea of age tech become a lot easier to explain. Where before I had to spell telehealth, right? Well, now people know what telehealth is.
Okay, now how do seniors typically respond to the technology?
Yeah, so the in the beginning, again, I learned this the hard way. When you shove technology down the throats of a senior, you get a lot of pushback. And that's why with Connected Home Living, we blend technology with live people. These are these are people. They're not robots. They're not AI. In fact, these are live people who are specially trained, and all they do is prevent rehospitalization and also keep the company with these very lonely people, residents. And so these folks, when we first introduced the solution, these remote care coordinators, as we call them, they typically work from home, and they have some have clinical backgrounds, some have technical clinical backgrounds. But anyway, they're the ones who would first reach out to these folks. We first start off with a phone call, introduce them to the program. Sometimes we won't shove technology on day one, and maybe day one would be like, hey, tell me about your situation, or I have history of your rehospitalization. I'm here to help you. And so let me just start with the basic. Let me ask questions about your chronic ailment. Let me ask you about your vitals. Let me ask you some questions about some of these red flags. And then over time, we start inserting technology to blend in, because we know for many seniors, jumping into technology head first is a difficult endeavor to jump on, especially if they have difficulty using their own TV remote, right? So if you want to introduce technology and this person doesn't know how to use a TV remote, it's going to be difficult on day one, right? So
Right.
the human element is one of the key factors why we're successful here at CHL.
Okay, very good. Now, the seniors, I'm pretty sure they're either comfortable or does it take some adjustment to get used to the technology?
Yeah, so that's why, for some in the beginning it was very difficult. And a lot of the folks, when we started doing this in 2015, seniors were just barely starting to use smartphones or tablets, and so asking them to install the app onto their phone, it was very difficult. But now today, people, many seniors, it's really rare to find a senior who doesn't have a smartphone or who doesn't have a tablet. And also back then too, it was very difficult because many folks did not have internet, right? And now Wi-Fi is now included with your cable, so it's a lot more prevalent. So yeah. So in the beginning, there was a lot of hand holding by our remote care coordinators. So we typically start off with a phone call, but once they got comfortable with the phone call, then we start talking to them through video calling, and then we started using video calling. Then I said, hey, that blood pressure monitor that you have there in front of you, let me show you how to put it on, because I got one exactly right like it here on my end. So we would walk them through, how to put the cuff on, making sure the tube is on the bend of your elbow, and then we'll just sit there. And then we'll walk them how to use the pulse oximeter as another example. So there was a lot of hand holding in the beginning, but there's a prevalent call button in there. When they press it, they have a choice of either calling their remote care coordinator, video calling, or texting. A lot of times they just want to see them on video. So they click that video calling button and boop, up pops that remote care coordinator and get to talk to them live 24/7.
So it's like virtual care, pretty much, right?
Yeah. Virtual call. Yeah.
Oh,
So that's the key thing that is one of the secrets of our services is our virtual care program. I was going to just give a good example what a virtual care from our perspective. So oftentimes, as I mentioned, many folks cannot afford around the clock care. And so when we partner with families or we partner with home care agencies, they would tell us, hey, Connected Home Living, my caregiver is going to be leaving Mrs. Smith's home at 1 p.m. So she's going to be by herself from 1:01 p.m. all the way to 8 a.m. the following morning. Can I have
that's
your
right.
remote
Yeah.
care coordinator or virtual caregiver? Could they check in throughout the day? So we'll call in, either on a scheduled basis or randomly, and we'll call them over the phone or over the tablet. But their favorite one is what we call nighttime check-in. So we'll call in right before they go to bed, like right around 7:30 at night, and we'll call Mrs. Smith. Hey, Mrs. Smith, how was your caregiver? Well, how was your grandkid visits today? Right. That's the first thing we do is we want to continue to establish that companionship and camaraderie. But before we hang up, we go through our mini checklist. Okay, Mrs. Smith, before we go to bed, did you turn off that stove? Because you left it on 3 times already. Okay, I'll stay here on the video until that stove is turned off. Okay. All right. Great. Now that you got that turned off, I'm hearing the dog barking in the back end. Let's make sure Fifi's inside the house because I don't want you getting up in the middle of the night and falling again on the way to the dining room. So I'm going to wait here until the dog's inside. And while you're at it, could you make sure the doors are locked? Boop, 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 boop. All right. And it says right here, according
Nice.
to your home care agency, you have blood work tomorrow at 9 a.m., which means you can't eat past 10 p.m., right? So, because you have to fast. Okay, I'm glad I reminded you because you're about to have that Snicker bar. All right. Now, before I hang up, do you have your right to your appointment? Oh, you don't have a ride. Well, we can't afford you to miss that ride. So let me coordinate that ride for you, that transport, because this blood work's important to readjust your medication, right? So anyway, so that virtual caregiver is the extension of the family member or the home care agency because they're not there physically, but we are, right?
That makes sense. Total sense. Yes. I want to bring this up because this is one part of your arsenal of services you provide. So where does AI fit into the bigger vision, let's say with remote patient monitoring?
Yeah, good question. So we use various technologies. So one of the technology we utilize is remote patient monitoring. So remote patient monitoring is a device or an app that we install on their smartphone or tablet. But if they don't want to use their smartphone or tablet, we provide what we call a telehealth kit. And that kit comes with its own tablet and internet built in. But it also include a number of medical devices like blood pressure monitor, pulse oximeter, weight scale, glucometer, stethoscope. Anyway, we retrofit the appropriate telehealth system based on the patient's chronic condition. So anyway, so on an ongoing basis, either the app on their phone or this telehealth kit would prompt the patient to answer some specific questions about their chronic conditions and also take their vitals. And once that information is stored in there, our system's algorithm determines when things are going the right or the wrong way, or whether they're within or outside their normal range. And if it's out to normal range, it automatically sends out an alert to my company 24/7. And then we intervene right there and then, right? We don't let matters exacerbate. Let's say I'm having difficulty breathing. We'll pop up on the screen. It's like, Mrs. Smith, is everything okay? You mentioned that you're having some difficulty breathing today, or you're having some dizziness, or your legs more swollen today than yesterday. So we provide that timely intervention. That's why our rehospitalization goes down quite dramatically. But anyway, this telehealth system that we utilize, it actually trends the data, right? So we're not just capturing information, right? But we're trending the information, and we develop a score, a health index score, every day that we capture that data. And we can tell, let's say today, say knock, maybe your health index is 85 today out of 100. But next week, maybe your health index is now down to 80. The following week's now going down to 75. So through AI that we built in, we would get these prompts letting us know, it's like, hey, our patient's not doing too well. I know it's not a red alert, but based on that trend and based on the AI that we've incorporated, we need to intervene now and supply this data with the physician so we can do something about it before matters exacerbate. So that's one form of
Okay.
AI that we utilize so far today. But we also use fall detection. So we have these fall detection devices that's a lot more advanced than what you see in the market. Because what you see in the market today are wearables that you see around your neck, like a little pendant, and or sometimes people wear these smartwatches now that help identify falls. And so these devices are great because they have what they call an accelerometer built in. So when the client falls like a tree, it identifies the fall really quick. But the problem about these devices, it does a bad job identifying slow falls. So most seniors, if you're in this world of senior care, they tend to slide off the bed, slide off the commode, slide off their recliner, and during the slow moving falls, these systems don't detect it, and that's why you see some of these seniors on the ground for hours, sometimes days. In fact, there's a recent news about Gene Hackman, the actor. They found his body 2 weeks after his death, right? So we knew that these wearables don't work, but also most seniors don't like it around their neck, especially when they go to bed or take a shower. Well, that's where all the falls happen, right? 85% of the falls happen in the bedroom and the shower. So anyway, so the reason why we moved away from that and moved away from cameras because they're super intrusive, we decided to go with a much more advanced system that has AI built in. So this is a radar-based solution. It's placed on the wall or up on the ceiling. When it sends out 4D radar waves, it comes back to us, and we see the shape of the person. We don't see their face. We don't see their body, their private parts. We just see the silhouette. right? We can see them moving around. We can see them sitting on a chair, laying on a bed. But more importantly, when it sees the subject on the ground, through AI, it says, "Hey, I see somebody on the ground. I'm going to stare at this subject for the next minute and a half. If they don't get up after a minute and a half, I'm going to beep so I can forewarn the subject that if they don't get up, I'm going to call for help. And if they still don't get up, then we're going to call for emergency. All right. So that's or we're going to escalate the process. So typically when we get that alert comes to our company 24/7. When we receive that alert, we first call the house. If there's no answer, we call the escalation contacts. If there's no answer, then we call 911 if necessary. Right. Literally every day we're saving lives. But the system that we use has AI built in. So once it's installed on the wall, as an example, it creates an imaginary 3-foot plane from the ground. It's invisible, right? But the AI creates this invisible 3-foot plane, and because when it looks at the subject, and if they see that torso area below that 3-foot plane, that's when it triggers. That's when it starts looking at that subject. Yeah, because they could be sitting on the ground, they could be passed out, and so that's when it goes through this escalation process. So that's one form of AI that's built in. The other cool thing about the technology, the AI that's built in there, when it scans the room, it does what we call site mapping. It looks at all the inanimate objects in the room, and it knows that that's a bed, that's a recliner, that's a sofa versus a coffee table. So the reason why we added that in there, because we want to make sure if they're laying on a chair, we don't want any false alerts. But that space between the sofa and the table, that area is a fall arena. So if they're in that area and they're below 3 feet, the AI kicks in and lets us know that that's a valid alert. Right. But it also, so that's one cool thing about the system. But the other cool thing that the technology offers is that just like the telehealth system that I just explained, it also trends the information. So let's say the client has fallen, but got up before we escalated the process. It still considers that as a fall, right? It records it, it trends it, it creates a score, and again lets my company know, oh boy, Mrs. Smith fell twice 2 weeks ago. The following week she fell 3 times, and this week, it's only Monday, and she's already fallen twice. All right, based on this trend, it's not going so well. Again, let's do something about it now before matters get worse. Maybe we need to get physical therapy. Maybe it's the medication that they're taking that's making them dizzy. Maybe there are tripping hazards around the room, right? So again, we like this data because it allows us to be more proactive, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Neil, there are other fall detection devices in the market. Why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, yeah. So I reinvented it because I learned the hard way that the current technology doesn't work. So, or there's limitations. So as I mentioned earlier, I own my own assisted living community, and so I've got 50 residents that I rely on, and also caregivers that let me know this thing doesn't work, right? So sometimes when they move into my community, they walk in with their little pendants that's around their neck. And I said to myself in the beginning, okay, well, they got their pendants. I'm going to be cool. I don't have to worry about them. And also too, but anyway, so when they move in, it was a false hope. All right. Because, as I mentioned, these folks, when they doesn't do a good job identifying real false when they slide off the bed or slide off the wheelchair. So it's gotten me in trouble as an owner because when we finally find out they've fallen, it's typically when they don't show up for breakfast or for dinner. It's 6:30. That's when dinner typically starts. And if they don't sit on that chair by, let's say, 7 o'clock, that's when we finally go to the room, right? And when we open up the door, there they are laying. Sometimes they're gone, right? And we're scratching our heads. Well, she has a pendant on. She has a pendant. Why didn't it work? And also, there's a little button that she can press all the time and get for help, right? But again, it doesn't do a good job identifying slow falls. And what I also found out, if the client has a stroke or a heart attack, or they hit their head on the ground and now they're unconscious, they can't press that button. So now they're on the ground for, sometimes for hours, despite us checking in and, listening through the door and see if we can hear any screaming. Sometimes they're too quiet for us to identify. So fall detection didn't work. Cameras also didn't work for us because when I started introducing cameras into the rooms, we were getting so many pushbacks because they don't want a camera staring at their mom while they're sleeping or while they're in the shower or going to the bathroom. So cameras were just were not were just not being accepted by both the resident and the family members. And also in my community, I have these what are called pull cords, right? I have one in each wall. I have two in every bathroom. But in my 25 years owning my assisted living community, they never once fallen next to the pull cord, right? Because the pull cords are fixed, right? They're usually hidden behind a table or a dresser, right? And so, but if you want to let the strings lay out, it becomes a tripping hazard. So pull cords were ineffective, and that's why again, I actually replaced all of my pull cords in place of this because now the client doesn't have to do anything other than fall because our system will identify that.
Okay. Very good. And Neil, so the H tech space is growing, would you say?
Yeah.
What
Oh yeah.
trends are shaking up the H tech space right now?
The AI is becoming more and more prevalent, which AI driven diagnostics and care. What's hot that I'm seeing out there is generative AI in like in radiology or pathology and patient triage, because the impact with tools like Google Med LM or OpenAI GPT based systems are helping clinicians interpret these complex cases faster and more accurately. And why this is going to matter is because it speeds up the diagnosis, it lowers the human error, and believe it or not, some of them handles the documentation too, right? The other thing that I'm seeing more and more are personalized and predictive medicine, which is really cool. What's hot are like genomics, biomarkers, and AI combining to predict diseases before they happen. The impact of that is that preventative care based on DNA or health data. Uh, you know, think of proactive rather than being reactive in healthcare, right? So when this comes about, boy, it's going to dramatically reduce rehospitalization and chronic conditions flare up because these predictive analytical engines will help identify those way before things exacerbate. Yeah, AI is exciting. Every event that I go to, it's all about AI. We use AI now as part of our offering, but I see it becoming more and more prevalent in the market here in the short term.
Okay, perfect. And Neil, what's your biggest challenge lately? Like, what have you been running into?
The biggest challenge is we're one of the best kept secret in the market. It's not many people know that our solution exists today, and so it's education. It's getting the market awareness, but that requires huge amount of capital and huge amount of exposure. So yeah. That's number one, education. The other thing too is that here in the United States they expect healthcare to be free, right? And so our services is a private pay model. And so even though the cost is grossly um, much more inexpensive than an actual hands-on care, people still think, "Oh, I have insurance, so I just expect it to be part of my insurance." And even if we were to charge 25 cents for our services, for some of these folks, it's still way too much. Having the payer, I think, makes sense to it makes sense for them to shell our services or pay for our services because it really does affect their bottom line in the long run. But that's going to take a lot of work to get it going. Right? Having the payer pay for our services.
And lastly, are there any pain points AI could help fix?
Yeah. So for me, selfishly, as a for my company, I think for me, AI will help with our scalability, right? So right now, one remote care coordinator, depending on the patient type and acuity, can manage maybe 1 to 50 to 60 patients at a time, right? And but I feel with AI, we'll be able to scale much better. I'm hoping AI will when we get these alerts, I want the AI to be the first line of defense to address those basic type of feeling alerts. But if things need to be escalated more, then escalate to one of our human remote care coordinators. And if they still can't resolve it, then we escalate it to a higher level clinician. Right. So for me, AI will help me allow me to scale better, and that's what I'm looking to incorporate almost immediately. In fact, I'm vetting out a number of AI companies who could help me achieve that goal, and we'll see where it takes us.
Awesome. So Neil, that brings it closer to our show. Welcome. We'll be posting a weekly, and looking forward to the next show with you, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thanks for having me.